When we are hit with emotion, there are levels of what that emotion feels like in our body, depending on numerous factors that are taking place. And sometimes our reaction can even seem bigger to the other person that doesn't match what they view as happened because of the levels that are happening within inside our body. So Dr. Glenn and Phyllis have done some really beautiful research on how to name the scale of what's going on inside of you in processing your emotion. So that's what we're moving towards today, and we are so thrilled that you are here. Welcome to the Connection Codes podcast. This is the podcast where we break open our emotion to take us from being disconnected to connected in our relationships and in ourselves. I am your host, Tiara Wages, and joining me is marriage and family therapist, clinical sexologist, Dr. Glenn Hill, and his incredible wife, Phyllis. Together, they have founded the Connection Codes, which is the guide to human connection. And we're so glad you're here.
Yes, hello world.
Hi, friends.
Yeah.
Wow. So, it's interesting because sometimes people go, well, how do you plan your podcast? How do you come up with your topics? Sometimes it's because of what people email in, for sure. And then other times it's just in conversation that we come up with. And yesterday we were guests on a podcast, which we do want to just pause right now and mention. We love being guests on podcasts. So if you have a podcast, we would love to be on it. If you know someone who hosts a podcast, we'd love to be on that podcast. That's probably one of our funnest things that we do right now. Matter of fact, yesterday after we were on this podcast, and it was local, so we went to their studio, which was so fun, just hanging out with them. It was like Glenn and I both said, well, you started because you said, this is the funnest thing we're doing right now. And Glenn was like, I could be a guest. We could just be a guest on podcasts every single day.
Yeah.
Yes, full time. Like we are loving it so much. So please, if you know anyone or you have a podcast, we would love to be on your podcast. And part of what came up yesterday, which we actually didn't even really talk about, either it was at the very end of the podcast or it was even after, is the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is, and we have a part of it in our book, but it's called 43 feet. And why don't you kind of share like how the research of that and how that came about and just the importance of that?
Well, what the research showed us was that if we take you and put you in a chair, take you outside, set you on the ground, you're just sitting there, you're fine. We raise you up about a foot off the ground, you're probably still fine. And we measure pulse rate, sweat glands, and breathing, just the rate of breathing. And if we keep raising you up, those three indicators start escalating. You breathe a little faster, your pulse rate increases, and you start sweating. So 5 feet up, you're thinking, if Glenn dumps me out of this chair, this is not going to kill me, but this could hurt. 10 feet up, you're thinking, that's a story high. So 1 story high, 10 feet up, you're thinking, oh, crap, and there's no seat belt, there's no handles or anything. You're just kind of precarious there. Well, what the research showed was about, on average, 43 feet, people would max out on those three indicators. Their breathing would be really escalated, their pulse rate would be really escalated, and their sweat glands would be really active. But after 43 feet, again, on average, every human's unique, so there's a little bit of variation. But once you get up to 50 feet, it doesn't make any difference. It's the same as when you're at 43 feet. Now we raise you up to 60 feet, 80, 100. Now you're still escalated, but it has plateaued out. So we use that just as a number to start recognizing the degrees, the intensity, the levels of the emotional experience. You're feeling a ton more fear at 43 feet than you were at 5 feet or at 10 feet. But it's still just firing in the fear region of the brain. There's not a terrified region of the brain and then a scared region of the brain. It's all in the fear because there's only 5 neural regions that are associated with emotion. So it helps us to recognize, and also the other big crucial part of that is that we want to process the emotion long before it gets to 43 feet. You think about it, somebody's 43 feet up in the air, that's 4 stories high, they are maxed out on the fear experience. They might actually end up wiggling enough out of their terror that they actually cause themselves to fall out of the chair and bring about the very harm that they were so fearful of happening. And that's true with every emotion. Once people get up to these lower numbers, we don't have a real science equation for it, but at 20, 25, 30, 35 feet, we get unmanageable for ourselves and for those around us.
Glenn, hold on. I want you to say that again. When we get to 43 feet,
Right. Yeah.
we can become so overwhelmed by the emotion happening within our body that we can actually cause the very harm that we're afraid of.
Yeah, which happens all the time. People are so concerned, and this includes joy. Let me just mention that too. You get to 40 feet of joy, 43 feet of joy, you're going to make a stupid decision, unprocessed joy. You're going to make a stupid decision. You're going to binge watch. You got to go to work tomorrow morning. You got to get up at 6:30 a.m. and you watch your new favorite Ted Lasso season until 4:30 in the morning. Well, it's because you're flooded with joy because you love Ted Lasso, and I do too. But you were supposed to be asleep by 11, and instead you stayed up all night. You ended up buying something. You can't afford that. That car is going to be repossessed in 6 months, but you're so flooded with joy, and we make these terrible decisions. And it's important that people get that that's the exact same thing that happens for joy, too, because we all think, oh, joy is so good. No, joy just is. Joy just exists. It's neutral. Unprocessed joy can actually be detrimental, which is true for all the core emotions.
You know, I appreciate what you were saying a minute ago, that at times we experience the exact same experience, but our emotion levels are very different.
Right.
And it's really helpful to understand that, you know, going into this, you may only be feeling a foot of fear, and I may be feeling 15 feet of fear, or, you know, a joy or whatever, a sad, like, or shame, guilt. Like, it's all of those emotions to realize that we might be at different levels, and so we're experiencing it very differently. I know you've shared pretty openly that you hate stepping on cracks. It's a fear experience for you. I don't even notice the cracks. So there isn't even a fear experience for me. Yeah. And we don't always have the just, it's almost like not recognizing and accepting you and your experience and vice versa. And I think that one of the important things in understanding emotion and understanding when we use the word processing emotion, often people go, don't even know what that means, don't know how to do it. It's identifying, it's tuning in. It's like, whoa, what's happening for me? This is fear. And then, you know, we are wanting to get people to the point where at 1 foot they are processing that fear. And for whatever reason, as humans, we often wait until we are at a really high escalated rate.
Right.
And then sadly, even in that, it's like we're not sharing the emotion. We're just behaving out of the emotion.
Right.
We're
like
coming out of the chair.
Right.
Yep.
We are like, and what people are seeing, and I'm a visual person. Like, it helps me to actually see these things. And if you've ever done a ropes course, one of the activities, which I absolutely hate, and at this point in my life, I think I would refuse to do, but I've done it in the past, is to a harness be put on, and then you climb up a telephone pole. And the top of a telephone pole is how high?
I don't know.
Very high.
Maybe 43 feet.
Maybe so. I actually thought it was. But the first time I did it, I started off very confident at the bottom. And we didn't have a good lesson on processing fear or an emotion. We didn't get a class on that. And this was before connection codes even existed in our life. So I start off just pretty confident. I don't know what age I was. I was already a mom of 4, though. I'm sure. I think maybe not. But when you get to the top, you really are out of your mind, because the next step is to stand on top. Mm-hmm. And it physically seems absolutely impossible to stand on top. It doesn't matter that you have a harness on, but that is the whole exercise, is to get you up there, and then you jump, which again, the harness protects you, and it's supposed to be this crazy experience, which it is, crazy experience. But it's fascinating to see people in those moments, to see how they handle it, how they behave, how they get through that experience. The team, it's all team building. That's the whole kind of point of it. Some people miss that lesson, though, in it. But it's interesting when I visualize that. And the people, we had one incident in particular where the leader of our group, she got up there and went out of her mind. And they actually had to call in a fire.
Wow.
It was very fascinating. Had to call in the fire department. But I'd never seen her like that. And it was interesting to realize, and years later to know her. We didn't stay close, but we continued to hear about her. And she actually had a breakdown in her life, a whole mental breakdown. And I thought she never learned how to process emotion. And of course, back then I didn't even understand that. But it's kind of what we see when someone reaches those heights is often really kind of damaging. And that is the whole point of us tuning into ourselves, where we learn to identify what's happening for us and to be able to say, whoa, I'm experiencing fear. Whoa, I'm experiencing sad or guilt or shame. And to do that at a level that is really manageable for ourselves and for everyone else that's in our life.
Right.
Because the higher it gets, the more unmanageable it seems. And, I find it interesting. We have a term that's called I'm actually thinking of the term anger management. But, and it's something that we have in our court systems. Like, you go to court and a judge may say, you have to go to anger management classes because you have an anger issue. And, I've never been in one of those courses, so I don't know what they even teach, but it's kind of that idea of you're not processing your anger. And oftentimes, as we actually had an episode before this one on our podcast where we talked about secondary anger and primary anger. And so often I think even in that, people don't know how to process anger correctly, and they don't get to the core. And so they wait until they have this outburst that then gets them into trouble.
Yeah.
And they end up in front of a judge who says, you've got anger issues. You need to go to an anger management class. And it's like, well, unprocessed anger can become an issue for any and every one of us.
Right.
If we don't learn how to process anger and how to identify whether it's primary or secondary anger, and to find out how to get beyond it and behind it and under it, and to be able to go, oh, this is what's happening to me. Because often we lose it at certain amounts of whatever the emotion is. And that's what does often damage to everyone around us, and including ourselves.
Totally. And I'm really glad that you brought up the point of the goal is to process it at 1 foot.
Right.
Because we have heard from couples where, the one of the partners will email in and say, he doesn't want to hear, or she doesn't want to hear me constantly processing my emotion. And while I can understand, that perspective, the goal is, if you're processing it continuously at 1 foot, that is what will ultimately keep you connected. So you're not bottling it all up at the end of the day and then exploding. And just like in last week's episode, we talked about my experience of you getting the notification that there was an active shooter. And I immediately, probably in a second, I was at 25 to 30 feet of fear, maybe higher, just wondering where my kids are. And then I did come back down once I realized my kids were safe, but I never processed that. I never said in that moment, oh, I was just flooded with anger or fear. And that later then, as things just escalated throughout the day, my internals, kept building and building. It got higher and higher. And we do that so often in all aspects of life, even small moments. Our partner can say something, we'll feel sad about it, but we don't want to say anything. Well, then 10 minutes later, they say something else. We feel sad about it. We don't say anything. By the 4th or 5th time, we are now either angry at them, yelling at them. We are either avoiding, still face, cold shoulder, whatever you call it, but we've completely disconnected instead of addressing it at 1 foot.
Yeah. And we present three different angles of the same idea. The 43 feet, the river of emotion. The goal is that the emotions are just flowing freely. That's what they're supposed to do. And if not, there's an emotional dam, which is going to flood you. And then eventually the dam's going to burst. And, we just have so much damage from that. Or what we call the 1 pound weight. The goal, if I hand Phyllis a 1 pound weight 500 times, she doesn't even notice. And at the end of the month, she's like, whoa, that was 500 pounds of stuff. But if I wait till the end of the month and hand her 500 pounds, she's crushed. And I can barely budge. I can barely even handle it. And then it's so intense. So it's the same idea, all three of those analogies, but it just helps us to see that that's our goal. And that's our human coding. If you watch a 12-month-old, you don't wonder what's happening with them. You always know. This 12-month-old is not deciding that morning, okay, today I'm going to be authentic. Today I'm going to let mom and dad know what's happening with me. No, they just do it. It's just coded inside of them. It's just hardwired. I'm faith-based. I believe God designed it, but if there's no God and it's evolutionary and it's just how humans are, it's still the human condition. That is how humans function. That's how humans are designed, hardwired to function. So that's our goal, is just to reactivate our coding so that I don't hand Phyllis a 500-pound weight at the end of a day, a week, a month, because that'll crush her. She cannot handle that. But if I'm just, and Phyllis would say, and she's a connection coder, she knows that this is not technically true, but she's like, Glenn is not nearly as emotional as he was 10 years ago, 15, 20, 30 years ago. Well, actually, I am. I just hand it to her 1 pound at a time. So she's like, well, I can handle that. Gracious, I can dance with that all day long. 30 years ago, I wouldn't process the emotion, and it would build up. The emotional dam eventually would burst. And now she's like, oh my gosh, this guy's so emotional. I don't even know how to live with him. I love him, and I can hardly stand to be around him because the dams keep getting built up, and then they burst, built up and burst. And when they're getting dammed up, then I'm just removed from her. And so she doesn't know what's happening for me for hours, for a day, for 3 days, a week. And now we're disconnected, and then the dam bursts, and so it's just a disastrous scenario. But I'm just as emotional today as I've ever been. I just handle it as it's happening, and she can handle that.
Yeah.
I think so much about what we've been taught, and in a sense, what we're trying to change with what we're teaching with the connection codes, because I'm just shocked. I didn't grow up under a rock at all, and yet there's so much of this. I did the opposite. Like, I did the very opposite. I believe that I was taught, whether it was by my parents, by culture, by my community, I don't know, but almost like, you don't share it. You stuff it. You get over it. You go beyond it. And that is not how our bodies were designed. And if you are faith-based and you believe God designed you that way, even all the more shocking that we don't have this information, this education. And that, and I think that even that idea, and I'm going to go back to it, when someone says, oh, well, he has an anger issue. It's like, it's because he's been taught or she's been taught to stuff it. And we can't. Eventually your body explodes.
Yeah.
And it's going to come out some way.
Right.
And if you open your mouth, it's probably going to come out of your mouth.
Right.
And it's like for some people, they try desperately to stuff it, and then their head almost explodes, so they have headaches all the time. But eventually, if you ever open your mouth at all, it's going to come out there. Yeah. And it's like, that's where the damage is. And that's where people go, well, you just never know when they're going to explode. Well, it's because they're not processing it at 1 foot.
Right.
They're waiting until it's 43 feet, and then it just erupts. And the damage is always pretty significant. Yeah. And then people, you create a community around you. Like, it's, if you're in a family unit, then your family suffers. But then once you spew, then you go right back to happy and calm.
Yeah.
But you create an atmosphere where people have fear because they don't know when it's going to happen again.
Right.
And to realize it's because you're not processing at 1 foot.
Yeah, and this is one of my many pet peeves, especially with our faith-based communities. And this is part of our story early on, that, when we're 5, 6, 8, 10 years into our marriage, all of our friends started divorcing. And for a while there, at least best I can remember, it seemed like every 2, 3, 4 weeks, we'd hear about another couple that had married, that we grew up with them. We went to high school together, went to camp together. And these people, and we always knew that they'd marry and have 2.3 children and then live happily ever after. And instead they married, had 2.3 children, and then they divorced. And the phrase we would hear all the time is that, so-and-so is divorcing. And people go, oh, it's so sad. They had such a great marriage. And it was this bizarre, looking back, I'm like, what the heck? I don't even understand those sentences fitting together. But people genuinely believe that. And the reason is because everybody was so good at being inauthentic. So, everybody was basically lying and hiding. And so nobody knew.
Right.
But what was presented was that it was this spiritual attack, and that Satan was so tricky that this couple had a great marriage on Tuesday, and then Wednesday morning, boom, they filed for divorce because Satan snuck in overnight and poisoned their breakfast or something. I never fully understood it. But then, and that was actually, again, part of our story, that I just kept hearing that. I'm like, wait a minute, this can't be true. This doesn't make sense. They had a great marriage on Tuesday. Wednesday, they filed divorce papers. And that's one of the ingredients that got me curious. Like, I got to get this. I just couldn't figure out how that could possibly be true. And you hear these horrific stories in the news, that some guy kills his wife and kids and then kills himself. And I don't want to say always, pretty much always the news stories are that he had a psychotic break. And, and then the neighbors are interviewed and everybody's like, oh, they had the most wonderful family and they were always happy and they went on walks together. And then, boom, Thursday, he killed his wife and kids and himself. I'm like, wait a minute, that cannot be true. And of course, then as things progress, you find out, he had been having an affair for 3 years and, she had talked to a divorce attorney 6 times, and we're just hidden as a culture. And what we call psycholation. So just totally psychological isolation. Nobody knows what's happening with this individual, this couple, this family, this community, this unit, whatever. So, and again, that's part of our dream, is that we know that you don't have to be open with everybody, but you better be open with somebody. Because otherwise this stuff just builds up, and eventually there's going to be a dam bursting and there's no telling what's going to happen in that moment.
Right. And it can come in even 2 forms. So there are moments in life where you can go from 0 to 43 feet in a second with nothing prior happened. A car accident, a death of a loved one. I mean, there are multitude of things that could happen that can escalate you up very, very quickly. But then there are also the moments that it's the 1 pound, it's the 1 foot off the ground continuously, that over time, suddenly you look down and you're about to fall out because you haven't processed your emotion. You haven't learned your emotion. And now you're just going to come out of the chair because you don't know what else to do. And this plays out. And again, I want to really visualize these coming up a foot. A friend of mine texted me after we released episode 54 talking about the decision making. And she did the core emotion wheel with me, whether she even realized she did or not, processing her emotion around decision making. And for her, she said, it's the multitude of decisions that I have to make every single day. It's the accumulation of everything that I'm doing that then by the end, I'm tapped out and I can't make a decision. And I wish I had thought about that when we actually recorded the podcast, because that's such a great point. I may be standing at the shampoo aisle at Target after making 65 other decisions that day, and now I've just raised one all day long.
Wow. And
now I'm just standing there wasting an hour trying to make a decision. And I'm about to just fall out of my chair and leave without even getting any shampoo. And so we do this in every aspect of our life, as simple as making a decision, or these little cuts, these little digs that we experience from our partner, intentional or unintentional. I would assume unintentional. I don't know if your goal is to hurt your partner, you need to reach out for some help.
Absolutely.
The majority of people, their goal is not to intentionally hurt their partner, but we still experience it over and over and over. And every time we do, without processing it, we just raised up a foot.
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking about a question that we often get is kind of goes back around to the idea of, oh, every day I'm saying the same sad, or I'm saying the same hurt. And it's like this idea that I think people feel like we should be able to move on. We should be able to be done with that. And if that's what's firing in your brain, then you share it, even if it's the same thing every single day. And I think there are those even, and I think the other thing that we hear often, if I share a hurt, with Glenn, my point is not that I want him now to be miserable over that, or to wallow in that, or it's not even something that he has to carry. I just need to process it for myself so that I'm not carrying it. And I think that we so often react to each other. And I know the more you do this, and it becomes easier. I think about that even in our relationship, Tiara, just that, we've known each other really a short period of time.
Yeah.
And yet we live life as though we've been, in the same family for 40 years. Like,
Right.
and I think the beauty in it is that you can share your hurt with me, and I can share my hurt with you. And we know that doesn't change how we love each other, or like, it is such a weird thing in a way, because that's not how most of society live.
Totally.
Most of society live, oh, you hurt me? Well, goodbye. I'm
Right.
never going to be around you again.
Yeah.
Instead of going, oh man, thank you for telling me that I hurt you. And we've shared that even today several times, that I feel guilt that I didn't call you last week. And not for 1 minute do I think that now I've hurt our friendship.
Right.
Matter of fact, I think, and I not just think, I know I've strengthened our friendship.
Yeah.
Me acknowledging my guilt with you actually just drew us together.
Right.
And yet that is really not how most of society function.
Yeah. Well, and it's because most of society doesn't even realize that they should process their guilt about it.
Right.
They're like,
you need to get over it.
you need to get over it, or, oh, I'm just going to avoid this person now.
Right.
Because I don't even know how to handle it. And there's just so much power in being able to be like, ooh, I missed that. I missed this.
Yeah.
And often it's those one step up, the 1 foot, those are misses.
Yeah.
They're misses.
Yeah.
And they can very easily be, put back on the ground if you can process it quickly.
Yeah, and missing it does not even mean that you're wrong.
Right.
Phyllis says to me, thanks for helping me. Well, that's a pain point for me. And the vast majority, but she's not wrong to say that. That is not a wrong thing. And there's 150 million men she could have married that would have sold for. And it doesn't for me. I love it when she says, thanks for partnering.
Can you mention at what level, just because that's the podcast right now that we're talking about different levels, what level of pain would you say you experience when I say, thank you for helping me?
Well, many years ago, and it was pain and shame. I don't know if it's 43, but it was way up there, 25, 30, 35 feet. Now when you say it, again, this isn't science equations, but I mean, it's rarely more than 5 feet. But I just tell you in the moment. And that's a fascinating corollary to me, that now if you forget and you say, thanks for helping me, there are probably times you say it, I don't even notice. It's a zero pain experience, which I would have never thought that was true. That's just kind of an extra thing there.
I think that's huge, though, to slow down in that whole situation, because sometimes people go, could you give an example? Like what? Mm-hmm. And to me, that is an example where I said, thank you for helping me. And I would say for most of the listeners, they would think that was a positive statement, a kind statement, wow, you're nice that you thank your husband for helping you. But for Glenn, it was a pain experience. It was connected to shame. Right. So for him, it was a shame experience. But pre-connection codes, you didn't share with me that it was a shame experience. You felt it and you held it within yourself, and then you would explode at some point. And I would be just kind of like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. And I sure didn't know that in my little list of things to do and not do, that was one of those that was like, oh, you're a terrible wife. You just said, thank you for helping me. Like that wasn't in my little booklet that I got the day we got married. And, Glenn didn't have the words, didn't understand that was hitting his shame region.
Yeah.
But eventually he got that. But he was experiencing in his body at a 43 feet level when I would say, thank you for, helping me, or maybe more specific, thank you for unloading the dishwasher. Many of you have heard that story.
Right.
And so, wow, it just changed so much when he was able, when I tuned in, what's happening, what are you hearing me say, when he was able to share at the core what his emotion was. And then, more recently, it happened in an incident where I said, thanks for helping me. And he said, oh, I feel like a minimum wage employee when you say that. And he was just able to share it, but it didn't get to 43 feet. It might've been at 5 feet, but in that moment, it just went real quick to a 5 foot, and he felt it. And so he shared, pain. And I'm like, pain? I just said, thanks for helping me. And that's when I said, what's happening with you? And he said, I just feel some shame. I feel like I'm just a minimum wage employee. And I said, ooh, I hear that. I think I've missed it with you on that. And what's happening with you? What do you need? Which the need was, could you just word it differently? Could you word it? And I said, okay, what's a better wording? And he said, could you say, thanks for partnering with me? And I'm like, I can do that.
Right.
And I think that that's so important to realize this is not a right or a wrong. And it's funny, we were talking with someone just recently that they want it to be logistical. They want it to be right and wrong. They want to be able to prove in court, I was right. And I get that. But even with that, you got to process what's happening for you.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we as humans feel like we have to be right.
Right.
And you go, okay, what's happening with that? What's under that?
Yeah.
And you got to find out and figure out what's happening with you, that is what you want to stand on. You want to be able to go, no, I just have to be right.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, that's a tough one.
That is. Yeah. Totally agree. I do want to point out that there's nothing wrong with being a minimum wage employee for our listeners. If any of you if you're like,
Absolutely.
You just don't want to be one in your home. You
Right.
don't want to be
Right.
viewed as that within your house. So I just want to point that out. But no, that's such a great point. And I think too, whenever you say that about going to the courtroom, that one of you has to be right, you're both going to lose.
Absolutely.
There is no winning. If you ever interact with two people that have gone to court against each other, they both leave completely depleted and
Yes.
exhausted
Yes.
and in so much pain.
Yes.
And so being able to process. And also, I do want to ask, because you had said that was 43 feet. There's no limit. Is there a limit to the footage? Because like the nurse comes in after you've had a baby and they're like, well, what's your pain scale? 10 is you wish that you were dead. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, then in that case, I'm at a 4, where otherwise it'd be like, well, I'm hurting worse than I did yesterday. I think I'm at a 10. So is there a roof to this?
As far as what we call the 43 feet?
Right.
I mean, the point is you plateau out after that. If you're terrified, you're terrified. And if you keep raising the chair up higher, you're not terrified times 2. You're just terrified. You're petrified. You're maxed out on the emotional experience. And I would say that's true with any emotion. With shame, if I feel humiliated and then something more happens, I don't feel humiliated plus 20. I'm just humiliated. I feel degraded. I feel devalued, non-human. That's the fear of heights experience is scientific, but as far as the application of it, not specifically scientific, but it just helps people to get a reference point.
Totally.
It helps Phyllis a lot whenever I'm able to say, I felt some hurt with that. She goes, oh, what happened there? I'm like, oh, not much, just like 3 feet of hurt, maybe 6 feet. So it helps cue her in that, oh, this isn't a huge level of hurt. It's not a big emotional experience. It's just small. But I still just tell her in that moment that it happened.
I think the reason even that question's a good question, but to also the reason even thinking of it as we can plateau out, because otherwise sometimes we go, well, we compare each other.
Yeah. There you go.
And to go, okay, well, I'm experiencing it at 43. Well, I'm experiencing it at 87. And we get into this thing where it's like, whoa. we're both really maxed out.
Yep.
Let's just go there. We are both maxed
Right,
out
and we
in this
covered
experience.
that in the foundations course. Just that's the first point behind it is that your experience is your experience and
Right.
it's valid.
Yes.
And if you're feeling fear, can I share about the mice, the dead mouse?
Ugh, sure.
Okay. So we have some Airbnbs, and we were in one the other day, and there was a dead mouse floating in the toilet.
Oh.
Phyllis, it's a phobia. It's a something we don't know exactly, but she's just hates mice, terrified of mice. I see the mouse. First of all, I'm not bothered by mice. Second of all, I knew it was dead because it had drowned, and so when we raised the toilet lid, she squealed. She jumped back, and she just got flooded with fear.
Right.
Well, I didn't. So I can tell her all day long, no. Your fear is not valid. You shouldn't be feeling fear here, and that would make it worse, not better. I get it. Whatever reason, there's lots of things I feel fear about she doesn't, and vice versa.
Okay, I know we're on a tangent, and I thought you were going to tell the story. So we were at my daughter's house. I was at my daughter's house a couple of weeks ago, and there was a mouse, a live mouse in the washing machine. And she discovered it, and she wanted me to come and look at it. I can't even go look at it because I know that mouse is going to jump out and attack my face and bite my face off. It is such an experience for me, and I couldn't even help her. Yeah. I'm just like, and actually, this is what's funny. I'm like, slam that lid shut and turn it on and drown that sucker.
Yeah.
And she is like, Mom. She's like, no, I can't kill that mouse. I just have to figure out how to get it out and take it outside and let it go. And I'm just like, I'm almost having to leave her house because my fear level, it's irrational, but I'm just like, that mouse is about to come out and attack us.
Right.
I can't even go in your laundry room now. And it was just craziness, but I mean, it is what it is. And I just have to process the fear and just deal with how I need to deal with that. And don't ask me to help you catch a mouse. I'm not going to do it.
I'm going to argue on Phyllis's behalf that it is not irrational. It's just what happens.
Wow.
Do I experience it the exact same way? No, I don't. Would Terry experience it differently? I have no idea. It doesn't matter because your experience is your experience.
Yes.
And it's valid.
Yes.
It's rational. It's real. And that's just what happens for you in that moment. And again, the reason I say that is that we stop pathologizing people. Yes. We stop saying, well, your fear is valid, yours is not. Right. Yours is rational, yours is not. No, that's just what happens for you. Yeah. And every human is a unique human being, and their experience is their experience. And we have to learn to validate people that, just a position of curiosity. They're like, oh, really? So that's what happens for you there. Oh. And I'm entertained. I'm intrigued.
Well, and it does help me to just process because I didn't leave her house. Yeah. It didn't consume me. It didn't paralyze me. I just processed it. I said, oh, fear. I can't even go look. You can take pictures and show me, but I can't go look. You can do a video, whatever you want to do, but I just have too much fear. And she didn't, make fun of me or she just processed with me. And then I spent the rest of the day there and we had a beautiful day, but I knew the whole time that mouse was in that washing machine. Yeah. And, it was just interesting as her kids came home from school, different ones just were just fascinated. And it was the topic of the rest of the day. But for me, it's just like, no, thank you. I do not want to go in there. I'm not going to go in there. And, it's just, but I processed it so that I wasn't paralyzed by it.
Right.
I wasn't stuck in it, and I didn't keep it inside.
Right.
Because shame would also lead me to think, I don't want anyone to know that I'm afraid of that little bitty mouse that's in your washing machine. And I'm your mother. I'm my daughter's mother. Like, I should be able to go in there and rescue her by taking care of the mouse, right? But no, I just shared my fear and let it be.
Yeah, and I was listening to a podcast recently, very much non-connection coding podcast, and I don't know the individuals. I have no idea if I assume they're decent human beings, but they talked about perspective and that you have to give yourself, give other people, give your children perspective. And what they presented was, if your kids say that, oh, I'm really hungry, to say to them, there's children starving all over the planet. So your hunger and they didn't say it doesn't matter, but it was all framed that way. And you've probably seen the thing floating around. I won't be able to quote it, but something about I complained about my shoes, and then I saw someone who had no legs.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is, therefore, your experience is invalid.
Right.
The fact that your shoes are uncomfortable, you just need to shut up about it. We don't want to hear, number one, stop feeling pain with the discomfort of your shoes. Number two, shut up about it because there's somebody that doesn't have any legs. Well, that's true, but your experience is valid. Your shoes are uncomfortable. And just because we say there's perspective, because number one, you can always do that. I assume there's one person on the planet who's the worst off of everybody, of 8 billion people. I don't know how you figure that out, who that person is. But you can always say that. So none of our experiences are valid because there's somebody that's worse off than us, except for that one human being out of the 8 billion. And we do that all the time to people. We do that to our kids. Stop whining. You don't understand there are children that are worse off than you, so you should just be grateful for whatever. And we completely invalidate their
which is
experience.
just resisting the energy.
Right.
And even that day with the mouse, I mean, my daughter could have very easily said, Mom, that mouse cannot jump out of this washer.
Yeah.
She could have given me logistics of truth.
Yeah, and she would
which
have been
would have
totally
been-
correct and absolutely wrong.
Right, because she would have resisted my energy, but instead she just allowed me to process my fear, and she didn't put any judgment on it.
Right.
And then it's like it released out of my body, and then we moved on and had a fun day together, and the mouse didn't become the paralyzing topic
Totally.
in my life at the moment.
No, I'm really glad that y'all brought that up, from the question, just the plateau, and that whether you're at 43 feet or 86 feet, you are both immobilized. You are both feeling that so intensely. And so the comparison does not help at all. It is only going to hurt you instead of connecting over the emotion that you are experiencing. And so before we go into the core emotion wheel, one of the things I am really thinking about as we talk about this topic is we can even just vocalize that. So if Wes says something that hurts me, I can say, oh, sad. I'm only at 1 foot of sad, but I am sad.
Yeah.
And, or I can say, I'm experiencing fear and I'm at 43 feet right now.
Yeah.
And so that clues him in that not only am I experiencing an intense amount of fear, but I'm probably flooded too. So I'm also not going to be showing up as my best self. And I may need that follow-up, what do you need, is a really important question in that moment.
Yeah.
Where I'm at 1 foot, I may not need anything. Just need you to know it, so we can keep moving on.
Well, it goes back to, we've touched on this but what happened in Nashville last week. I think if we had understood you were at 43 feet of fear, the whole day would have gone differently. Our reaction would have gone differently. And to even be able to say, what do you need? And in that moment, you might have said, I need us to right now go in the car and go get the kids. I need them home right now.
Huge regret of not
You know
going
what
and
I'm
getting my
saying?
kids. Yeah.
Like in processing together, because we cannot ever, and this is so important for our listeners to understand, don't assume at what level the other person is at. You may hear them say, I feel fear for my kids. And in your mind, you're experiencing it for yourself. So you're maybe at just 5 feet, where the other may be at 43 feet. And that's a very different experience.
Yeah.
And to have tuned in to you last week differently, and to leaned into that with what's happening for you, and to have heard your level of fear, and to have gone, what do you need? And for you to go to slow yourself down and go, what do I need in this moment?
Yeah.
I need y'all to hold me. I need y'all to get in the car with me and drive over to our school. I know this isn't happening at our school.
Yeah.
But right now I need my kids home.
Yeah.
And to have just really gone, that's what I need. Yeah. That it's so real. This fear is so real.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how people reacted last week, but I know everybody was wanting really quickly to know which school was it.
Yeah.
Because we all have kids or grandkids in schools.
Right.
And it's like, where is this happening?
Right.
And to know that your response is so valid, and to go, right now, I need them home.
Yeah.
I need to run to the school where my kids are.
Right.
And I need to pull them out, and I need to bring them home. It's so valid. But when we don't lean in and we don't process, we don't necessarily show up for each other the way we should have because we don't know
100%.
at what level are you. Because too often we assume that we do know, or we assume it's the same that we're experiencing.
Right.
Which, you know, for us, yes, we have grandkids all over the city in different places. But when it wasn't any of their places, my level of fear wasn't at 43.
Right.
You know, and to go, wow, we've got to hear each other and we've got to show up and know at what level are you.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah,
then
and that
we
was the
may-
whole point of the 43 feet, just so that relationships, certainly partnered pairs, but relationships in general can just convey, just have some little ability to go, yeah, it's probably 10 feet of pain, 10 feet of fear, 10 feet of shame, so that they're able to convey. And again, those numbers are not scientific, but just that you know it's a lower level. You know, if it's at 35 feet of pain where I feel hurt by her, she's really, really going to pay more attention and tune into, 35, 40 feet.
Absolutely.
That's way up there. That's a big, big thing.
Right. 100%.
Good.
So good. So now we are going to go into our core emotion wheel, which is our proven tool to help you learn how to identify these emotions in your body. Because when you can learn to identify them and process them in the moment, you can stay lower until these big moments happen that are so far out of your control. But relationally, you can stay pretty manageable the majority of the time and get to the core quickly when you know how. But when you don't know how, I would imagine you're operating at 43 feet the majority of the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So good. So Tara, will you do the wheel for us?
Oh, I will do the will. I have some fear in doing the will. Okay. And you may just do it of what's happening for me in this moment of life. So we're recording this episode a week out from that shooting happening. I am angry, which we did talk about in this last episode. I have a lot of anger that I have to live in, that I live in fear constantly with my kids, and that my kids are now living in fear because they have to understand what an active shooter drill is. And I have to explain to them what a mass shooting is. So much anger that this is the society that I'm raising, that we have our kids in. I have shame that I can't just let it go. I wish I could just be like, oh, well, that doesn't affect me. I wish that I could just brush it off. But the fact that I do, I have shame that I care so deeply about this issue and this topic. I have guilt because I don't know that I convey it correctly all the time, that I do use my anger as my fuel to get out of the bed every day.
Wow.
And so because I use that anger to get out of bed every day, I won't say that I couldn't be divisive at times through that anger. And so I have guilt over that. I don't want to say my fear because I don't want to cry. So I'll say an easy fear. My easy fear is that nothing's going to change. You know, that we're just going to keep in this cycle continuously. And one of the things that Connection Codes teaches is how to break the cycle. And so I just desperately want to break this cycle that we keep finding ourselves in. I have lonely, that people, while I know people do understand this fear and this pain, it's hard to see them when I see so many people that can separate themselves from it. So if you can separate yourself from a topic, it's hard for people who can't to feel not lonely. And I feel really lonely in that. Hurt that I feel like I took my son's innocence last week when I sat him down and told him about it. I knew he'd hear about it at school. So I told him there was a shooting, and he thought it was a video shoot because we have a video production business, and there was a lot of confusion happening in that conversation of why people died on the video shoot. And so I saw his whole demeanor change when he realized that that's not what it was. So I'm just so hurt about that. And I have joy that I have the tools now to identify and process So even in these moments of 43 feet, I can quickly reconnect or connect with my partner, with those around me, with my children, and have conversations that are healing in a sense, valid comfort instead of just creating more pain in my life. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. My goodness.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. And I would encourage anyone listening, go to connectioncodes.co/podcast and do this with yourself today. You know, we mentioned at the end of last week's episode, there's just so much happening right now. And whether you live in our city and you were affected, because what I have found is we are all one removed from someone who had direct impact from this horrible shooting that took place. But you're impacted, you know, even if it's just watching the news when there's things that are happening, or you have dysregulation inside your house. There are things firing in your body right now that if you continue to hold them in, you will stay at 43 feet and eventually come out of that chair because you don't know how to say the words to bring you back down to the ground.
Right.
And this tool is the physical words that we will give you that can bring you back down to the ground, where you can look in your partner's eyes, where you can look in your kids' eyes and connect with them. So go to connectioncodes.co/podcast to get that tool. And we are so glad that you're here, that you show up every single week. I've just had so much joy recently looking at the growth our podcast has had in just such a short amount of time.
Amazing.
And seeing that you are sharing and seeing that you are leaving reviews and commenting and emailing us just brings us so much joy and less fear. There's still fear in opening up vulnerably, but less fear in like coming here and just like, this is where I'm at. Because to share with you our insides is not easy to do every single time.
Yeah.
And thank you for accepting that and holding it with such beauty. But we do that. We continue to do it because...
Yeah, and we just want you to convey to other people, just like we convey to you, that you need this.
You deserve this.
So let's do this.
Let's do this.